Cindy, if you'd like to start us off.
Yes, I would. Dr. Alvin, I would like to address my question to you. There are more standards out there coming our way, and maybe the parents don't know about those, the next generation science standards, the C3, the college career civic life standards. You and I had a discussion about possible art standards. I've heard rumors about health standards. How are we going to fit all those standards in our education and still maintain some sort of control over what we as Frederick County people want to teach our children?
Well, once again, I think when we look at standards, that's when we turn to our teachers and our staff to say, how does this connect? We already have a lot of standards that we're working on in social studies and science, even though they may not be Common Core standards that we've designed our curriculum around, the expectations that we have for our students. And so as things come, we look at what are we already doing that fits, what do we need to tweak. But the reality is that, and Mr. Brennan will back me up on this, the workload on our teachers is getting more intense as more and more expectations do come down. So we do our best to try to balance things out, and once again, to make sure that it fits with what our students need and what we're hearing from our local colleges, and we work very closely with our institutes of higher education, as well as our local business leaders in terms of what skills and expectations they have for our students.
Thank you very much. Please, as you're waiting, feel free to line up behind the microphone if anybody else has a question in mind. If not, I'll have to ask questions, and that can get ugly.
I just want to know what happens if a locality says no to Common Cause. Is there an adverse effect, or is there no effect on the school system itself?
Do you want me to answer that from the Frederick County perspective?
Who would like to answer that? Sure, please.
Well, when the grant was proposed, Race to the Top, our local Board of Education did choose to say no. And so we did not receive funding that came with that grant. However, there were state laws passed that mandated some pieces of the Race to the Top principles. And once again, because we are under the Maryland State Department of Education, we have to ensure that our curriculum aligns with standards that they set. Our students will be expected to take the state assessment, and that's part of our accountability at the state as well as at the federal level. So while we opt out by not signing on to the grant, there were other components where we did not have a choice about opting out. And that's one of the things that I have already spoken to several of the parents here this evening and have said to, will say to everyone, as Maryland makes the decision about whether or not to apply for a waiver from ESCA, that waiver includes a lot of the Race to the Top principles. And so they are saying they're going to get public comment and hear from people this time, and that's something we need to pay close attention to, because at that point, we would be obligated to all of it if we've signed on for a waiver that implements that.
If I could just add, I mean, it's the big stick here is the assessments, the standardized tests, and teacher evaluations tied to the standardized tests. So if you're taking one of the consortia standardized tests or an off-the-shelf test from ACT like Alabama and Utah are doing, you're taking one of those tests, then there's going to be immense pressure to teach what's going to be on that test. And that's the idea. They're very explicit about that.
Thank you.
Good evening. I have more of a statement than a question, but it's hard to know who to address here on the panel because I feel like all of us, including school administrators on the local level at least, are potential victims of Common Core. There's so little information that it's hard to even know what questions to ask you or what to complain about. There's no history. What's caused me the most concern is that here we are just learning about Common Core even though it was adopted by Maryland 3 years ago. This says to me that the Maryland Department of Education has no regard for parental input, much less even the common courtesy to inform us. I can't help but feel that in a way we're all being set up. All these pieces are being put in place. We don't know where they're going to go. We're trying to play catch-up learning about this issue, and there's been no transparency. And I think it's no wonder that parents are raising red flags and a little bit up in arms. I think that we've all been sold out by the Maryland Department of Education over funding incentives. And maybe all of you could just comment on that and also talk a little bit about those funding incentives.
All right. Part of the problem here, and started going down this road in a big way with No Child Left Behind, and Race to the Top was 2 leaps further down this road. But remember, No Child Left Behind started with this accountability. It's got to be accountability for everything. And they never finished the sentence, in my book. The issue isn't accountability. It's accountability to whom? And accountability only flows one way. There's a dominant party to whom you're accountable. And if it's flowing to the federal government or associations or what, it's flowing outside the state, then parents are denigrated, citizens of the state are denigrated. It's a loss of control. And I find this astounding in any profession where we're talking about the care of the individual. I mean, we wouldn't do this in the legal profession. We wouldn't do it in the ministry. We wouldn't do it people would be in an uproar if you did it with sports. So teaching is a profession, it's an art, it's the care of the individual at the most formative stage. And it should be a very personal, professional effort in which the parents are deeply involved, and the teachers, a conversation most of all with the teacher and the parent involving the principal, not bureaucrats in Washington or associations or Bill Gates or anyone else. I went through that process. That was the idea, not to get the people out of this process. It was a very quick process, and the states had to decide, okay, am I going to say no to money? And it sounds good. We don't have any product, so it's no to a promise of something that is really good. And very few of them did. They didn't have the courage to do it.
Thank you, Mr. McGrody. I believe Mr. Brennan has something to add.
Yeah, the Maryland State Board of Education is one of the most insular and isolated aspects of state government or any kind of government I've ever come in contact. And when Race to the Top first came out, teachers associations across the state publicly implored the boards of educations to talk to us, to meet with us, to include us, and the state board and the then state superintendent did the very minimal amount they could and ignored every single thing that we had to say. They checked off a box that they had spoken to teachers groups, but they didn't listen to a word we said. I've spoken in front of the State Board of Ed. Their meetings, no one goes to their meetings. They're not really well publicized. They're very highly regimented by the state superintendent, and I found them to be one of the least responsive groups. I go and speak to our local Board of Education quite a bit, to the point that they're just sick of me. But they're there to listen, and I have conversations with them, and I do feel that we can have influence, and they at least want to hear from the teachers' representatives. I have not gotten that same feeling from the State Board of Ed, so I really agree with the person who asked the question. I would say parents groups as well as teachers groups, we really do need to change the way that the state board, and I'm sure it's not unique to Maryland, I don't know any other state boards of education, but they are very detached from the students and the educators that they oversee, and I think that's a really big problem.
Could I add that in Massachusetts, I was told recently by someone who's on a local school committee, as we call them in Massachusetts, that when the State Board of Ed in July 2010 voted to adopt Common Core, not one school committee in Massachusetts knew about the vote in advance. They were told after the fact. And they were stunned when they found out the day afterwards that the Board of Ed had voted to adopt a new set of standards and basically took away most of their privileges, rights, responsibilities. The question is where you go now, 3 years later, as someone earlier said. We're now finding out because state legislatures are being asked to pay the bills for the high-tech stuff that goes with the assessment. And there's other bills to be paid as well for professional development for teachers and administrators. The question is, what do you do with a very negligent State Board of Education? Maybe a lawsuit that they violated process issues? I don't know. I'm trying to just raise some of these questions. I was on a state board at the time in Massachusetts, and I knew that nobody on this board wanted to even find out cost-benefit analysis. Was this going to cost the state any money at all? No state we know of bothered to ask for a cost-benefit analysis of what adopting these new standards was going to cost. Also, what about the input from higher ed faculty for something called college readiness? Not one bothered to find out. So there must be some way of saying null and void for that decision. But maybe we should be trying to just get rid of state boards of education altogether and keep things at a local level where parents at least have a way of finding out what's going on.
Next question, please.
I just very briefly want to add that I have said publicly before, and I will say again, the Frederick County Board of Education did not accept Race to the Top, and I give them a lot of credit for that because they did not have all the answers at the time they were being asked to sign on, and it took great courage on their part not to sign on, so I just want to acknowledge that.
I have more of a logistical question for Mr. McGroarty. You said that Common Core, the organization that created the curriculum, isn't part of the government. It's not accountable to the government. It is therefore not accountable to freedom of information. And I also was looking up the NEDM, the data mining standards that were recommended that Sheila mentioned earlier. That includes for students, at least at a cursory glance, things like what courses they took, what grades they got on it, when they completed it. And I'm just wondering, who gets this information? Because is it possible that what grade somebody got in math in 3rd grade depends on whether or not they get a job when they get out at 18?
I'll take that part of it, and Emmett, you can take it. It depends on your state because, as some people have noted, Race to the Top required state databases, the development of state databases, and some states have elected to share certain data with third-party education providers. Now, the definition of a provider is pretty wide, okay? But the one thing is, like, I don't know how many people have started getting advertisements in the mail for education products, but I have in New Jersey, and that didn't happen 5 years ago. So how do these companies know, number one, that I have kids and that my kids are in school? Well, because New Jersey is one of the states that decided that they will participate in this edu-sharing program. And of course, they say they're doing it to help the students. So students will get the help they need because they can share information about the needs of students. So that's part of what's going on with the databases. I don't know if Maryland has signed on to that, but some states have decided to give data to third-party providers.
Do you see it as a possibility that that could eventually become a criteria that people look at as employers?
Well, I think once the data are out there, the data are out there. What people do with it, I don't know. But if the data are out there, then I'm sure people can look at it.
And that brings up another concern that I have heard expressed, which is in concern with one of the other questions about the opting out. And what I have heard is because of this massive information that is being collected on students that are in schools that are part of the Common Core system, if you're not in that Common Core system, then you're not having this data collected about you. It could end up being the same thing as not having any credit when you go to buy a house.
Yeah, it could be. If your school district uses electronic report cards, then there's already at least data on grades on your students.
But would the lack of data also prevent opportunities for those who opted out, is kind of the question.
I don't know. Maybe Emmett has more information on that.
I think that would take several steps of development down the road, but it is my limited opinion on that now. I say limited because it's very difficult to get a handle on all the different data points that are being collected by all the state governments and the federal government. I mean, and then 2 years ago, the federal government relaxed the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act regulations to make it easier to share data between state agencies, between states, and between the federal government and the state governments. And they even relaxed it to the point where this data can now be shared with private entities, whether they're inside the United States or outside the United States. And it's highly problematic. Now, do they have protections in place? Well, yes, they try to put protections in place, but they're very weak protections, and they're not current with the capabilities of computers these days. So they can share data, but then you have to have an agreement with the party with whom you share the data that they'll return it or destroy it when it's done. But it's basically an unenforceable agreement. And then there's another point too that they say, well, this data will be anonymous. So then you have to look at the definition of anonymous. By anonymous, they mean, well, before we share it, we take the name. Yes, but then they attach an identifier to it, a number. Like a Social Security number was one suggestion at a Department of Education forum a couple years ago, but an identifier. So it is going to be identifiable, and you only need 3 or 4 points of data on somebody in order to reattach identity to it. And then you look at the broad purpose. They're very explicit about the purpose. They want to be able to track students from kindergarten or pre-kindergarten even into their careers, basically tracking for their whole lives. Why do they want to do it? This is the part that Professor Tika was talking about, centralization. The more you centralize things, then in order to responsibly govern, maybe a poor choice of words there, the more you centralize things, the more data you need in order to make decisions. If people are making their own decisions, you don't need data. If the federal government's making the decisions, then you need a lot of data. And they're looking at education as workforce preparation. So they're basically breaking down the barriers between the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, Health and Human Services, and Department of Labor. In fact, the Department of Education and Department of Labor even issued kind of a joint data collection grant a couple years ago. So,
Thank you.
One thing to Gary's comment, to back up what you said about MSTE, I've written them tons of letters not one response, not even from a secretary saying, thanks, but, we're busy right now. And not to pick on you, but, I know well what they say, so I have more questions for you. And that is, in keeping with, Frederick did not sign up for the Race to the Top funds. I have recently learned that Maryland is a local control school, or a local control state. And as a local control state, our individual boards of education get to decide our standards. And if I learn that that is a fact, are you willing to say to the Maryland State Board of Education, we're not going to continue with Common Core, we're going to go back to the standards that made us number one?
I would need to see what you're referring to that indicates that, because as I said, between COMAR and the federal regulations for accountability,
At COMAR, it does say that Maryland,
And even
all
our-
the power
I mean-
resides in the local Board of Education. And even people, and I can send you the email from MSDE that says Maryland is a local control state. We have always in the past let our local boards of education decide what their standards and their curriculum will be. So if I learn that that is indeed a fact, I'm asking you, are you willing to say to Maryland, we're no longer going to go with Common Core, we're going to go back with what made us the number one education system in the state?
well, first I would need a strong definition on what they mean by local control, and then secondly, I'm not the right person to ask because the curriculum and the curriculum standards are approved by our board, so that would
So
be a
you can't say
decision of
whether
the
you would-
Board of Education.
So you can't say whether you would support that or not if you found out you could.
Well, once again, what you're saying in terms of Maryland says they're a local control state. In my 33 years of experience, the standards have always come down to us from state levels, and we were then allowed to develop our own curriculum as long as we align with those standards.
Right,
So-
because in a bureaucracy, we have, not you, predecessors and people before you have abdicated those responsibilities, so they have said that, we're going to just follow what you're saying we can do. We're not going to bother with doing it on our own because boards of education are notoriously lazy, whether they're on the state or the local level, even though I love ours, and ours now is doing a great job, but we've had some in the past that just slough everything off. So you're just not willing to say whether you'd
I
support
think this
saying
is
no.
a further conversation along with our Board of Education. I would need to find out where the Board of Education stands and take
Okay.
my direction from them.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just chime in real quick. We, as much as I might love to, can't just ignore the dictates that come down from the state. They're also half of our funding agency as well, and they have a lot of control, as we've learned, just as the federal government has a lot of control with very little money to our school system. The state provides half of our budget, and through COMAR rules and others, we do have to follow. Now, exactly where Common Core is, and that, the big cudgel they've used against us with Common Core has been tied more into waiver requests and Race to the Top so far, but we don't know exactly how that's going to sort out. Now, I know that the superintendent and this board have pushed back on the state in terms of a lot of the rules that came out of both the waiver and the Common Core application, the Race to the Top application, and I support that and support them in that effort.
Thank you. Next question, please.
I'd like to address this to Ms. Stotsky. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. Initially, I'm going to first ask a question that I'll answer myself. Does everyone need to go to college? No. That being said, how does regular schmoes like myself understand the process of developing standards when we recognize that X percent is not going to go to college or some may excel higher? Thank you.
Well, let me say first that they are called college and career ready standards based on a flawed assumption that you need the same set of skills by grade 12 for either going to college or for going into a career. That has not been shown to have any evidence to support it. But nevertheless, that is what they are labeled, college and career ready standards. Now, how standards get developed, I can tell you how state standards get developed because there is a very clear process in most states by which they were developed and then went out for public comment and approved. But Common Core's standards were developed behind the scenes. I was on the Common Core Validation Committee, which was in name only a validation committee. We were basically expected to be a rubber stamp. But they were developed in private. There's no FOIA possible because it was two private organizations that could do whatever they wanted. FOIA means no Freedom of Information Act. You can't even find out why they appointed the people they did to write the standards. This couldn't be done by a public agency. This was not, you see, these standards were not developed by a public agency, so the public procedures and the safeguards that you have with sunshine laws and other kinds of safeguards like FOIAs that you can request, they don't apply in this situation. So it's a long story how Common Core's standards got developed by unnamed people behind the scenes and got shoved through without any publicity, bypassed deliberately state legislatures, bypassed deliberately parents, just a governor's signature, a commissioner of ed's signature, and maybe the chair of a board of ed, not even necessarily the whole of a board of ed, because they wanted to get it through with what they thought was the legal requirement for a state board, which normally in most states has the authority to approve of a state's standards. But they played games, which we can't go into the details of here. So where do we go from there? The problem is you're stuck with a legal trap that a lot of states are now trying to figure out how do we get out of once they began to see that they've got bills to pay that they never approved of, and they've got standards that were never approved of by most parents. Indeed, most parents and most teachers didn't even know what was coming down the pike.
So might a route be to understand the mechanism states use to create these standards?
To understand
the mechanism states use to create these standards, and then go after this based on that process, saying it was not fulfilled correctly?
Yeah. Yes. The states did not create these standards. So they were presented with them.
But if a state gets these standards, is what I'm saying.
they
would
bought them for
maybe
nothing.
be the process for someone who is not happy with this to try and oppose it?
Oh, to get out of what? I mean, I can speak to what's going on in other states. And there are several states that have taken steps to get out. There are several states that I think will be out within the next 6 to 8 months. What is going on in those states is that the people are going to their legislators and demanding the legislature to pull out. And in doing that, it's also spurring governors to, some governors are trying to get their state board of educations to reverse the decision to get out of.
By reappointing different people on a state board. There's local politics in every state, so each state is trying different mechanisms depending upon the personality of the governor, personality of the people in the state board. Every single one of them is trying a different mechanism.
The good thing is that the states have, as sovereign entities, they will always have the authority to pull out of the Common Core, say no to the federal government. And it's a matter of reasserting that authority. They, in a sense, advocated the authority, and they need to reassert it. As Justice Roberts said on the healthcare decision, at some point they have to start acting like states, and stop acting like administrative bodies of the federal government.
Thank you.
A little bit of part of that, though, as well, is I think another reason states signed on to this is because of the budget problems, education budget problems, and little bits of money dangled in front of really tight budgets has incredible amounts of influence we've seen. So I think the whole funding issue in detangling ourselves from the funding issue, I think that's part of it as well, and I think perhaps the State Board of Ed and the legislature will be more likely to change tack if they can also somehow figure out the funding issues that education faces as well.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you to all the presenters for coming out to us. I think we all have mixed opinions, and so don't you, and so for the courage basically to speak your mind, even though some of us might disagree with you. I have a background in standards development, and our country has been developing standards internationally for decades. Every industry, human services and business, have standards. It's necessary. And these organizations are certified by the American National Standards Institute. In order to do this, there is a kind of criteria that they need to follow.
Speak into the microphone better.
There's a criteria that they need to follow. Thank you. To actually meet the requirements for developing a consensus standard. These are physical paper standards. And it sounds like from what I'm hearing that no one in the education arena has actually done this for this Common Core program, developing true consensus standards where they bring individuals at every level, from parents to teachers to administrators, to work in committees on issues that affect quality. If someone could comment on that. And also, I just had one other question, and then I'll step away from the microphone. I heard a little bit about data collection in regards to performance, student performance, and I was wondering if anyone could speak to the type of data that was collected on performance and if it had been stratified. Do we have any longitudinal studies over the years? Has it been stratified by age, socioeconomic status, anything, or is it just general data?
Can I take the part of the first one? The reason why educators don't have a process, or they didn't use a process for developing the Common Core, is because educators were not involved in the development of the Common Core. That came from Achieve Incorporated, which is a business entity, and other business entities. So educators had no involvement in the development of the Common Core.
Yes,
So
it
by
should.
definition, from my standpoint, wearing my standards hat, I would not call them standards. I couldn't, by definition.
Well, but they called them standards and sold them that way.
Right. No, I understand that.
But you're right, ELA, the three people, or the two lead ones, had no teaching experience at any level, either K-12 or college level. No one knows why they were chosen.
Thank you.
In terms of your question about data, under No Child Left Behind, we have been reporting all of the state assessment data, and that does get disaggregated by student group, and it's all available on the Maryland State website, marylandpublicschools.org. There's a Maryland report card that has all of that, and so you can also look at over time, once again, because that was part of our federal and state accountability.
Thank you for that. And that they are stratified in a number of different ways? The
Well,
data?
originally with No Child Left Behind, how you were determined to be successful was if every student group was able to reach a certain performance level. And a big part of what was happening is the goal was that by 2014 you would have 100% across all groups. And that was a very challenging
I'm sure it was.
performance metric to meet. And so part of what happened with Race to the Top was they wanted to look at other things, and now they've offered a waiver so that states don't have to deal with AYP and they can do a different kind of accountability. And so right now, that's a very appealing thing to states to apply for these waivers from No Child Left Behind. But there's a tremendous amount of accountability data that's been collected for a decade.
Thank you for your
I just want to
interest.
follow up on that waiver suggestion. I think boards of education, state legislatures should be very careful because the requirements for these waivers mirror very closely the requirements for the Race to the Top application, very closely. So you have to be careful what you wish for and pick your poison wisely.
I'm going to add one last thing to that, because I think a lot of the decision makers are between the proverbial rock and hard places, because if they didn't seek the waiver, then they face the 2014, every one of your public schools is a failing school. That was a huge threat that hung over every single school, every principal, every superintendent, every teacher. And so that was yet another way to kind of lure people into, well, then to get away from that, now do this. I think we have to be careful. I think there are a lot of really well-meaning people who are facing really difficult decisions, and oftentimes there's a lot of unintended consequences. One of the positive things of No Child Left Behind was disaggregated data. It was very helpful to teachers, but then on the other side of it, the way it was used to beat on teachers and beat on school systems was extremely negative. So I think a lot of the decisions that are being made, the people that are trying to make the decisions are in a kind of a no-win until we really change the whole paradigm somehow.
In the
From a
interest of
parent's
time,
perspective, from a parent's perspective, and I really have a great respect for everyone here, but it feels like every 10 years or so you're experimenting with our kids.
Agreed.
It really does.
Well, policymakers are doing that.
if I may, in the interest of time, I'd like to have this conversation be taken offline. We've been given this facility for a limited amount of time this evening, and the American Legion provided it to us free of charge, but I'd like to let these guys help get started cleaning up and get out of here. May we do one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. So I apologize for everyone else that's been waiting, but out of respect for the facility and the people that are helping put this on, thank you.
But remember, you can contact us all via email, and we return email. So you can ask us any question you want at any point in time. And I think I speak for everybody on the panel. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. I've learned a lot. One question I do have as far as the data collection, and any of you can speak to this. I don't know if you know, is some of the data that they're going to be collecting behavioral data? We all know that that actually really impacts academic success. And how could that data then be used? In Maryland, we had sweeping gun control measures passed, and how could, if a child has a 504 plan due to mental issues, how will that data be collected and possibly used in their future?
I'll give you, this is what needs to be done. Every state needs to pass a modern privacy law. Parents, and most of the privacy laws are 20 and 30 years old. But parents should have the right to know what data is being collected. They should have the right to review that data, make corrections to mistakes. There should be a process for that. They should have the right to say that what data won't be collected. They should have the right to know where the data is going to go, or where it could go, and they should have the right to say no to that. None of these protections are in place, and this is very, very important. And or a few of these are, this needs to be done. And this really gets to the heart of the republic, because we're supposed to have citizen-directed government. Government is collecting data, portfolios. We can't have citizen-directed government. You can't direct something that intimidates you. And if government has data on you, it's intimidating.
Thank you. Let's give our panel one more round of applause. And one more round for the organizers of this event. Thank you all. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I hope you all had a good time. Thank you.